and Ayubowan. In this lesson, we're going to focus again on the speaking test, especially part 2 and part 3. Now, what is the cue card, or rather the topic? Describe a time when you moved to a new home or school. Alright, so this one, let's have a look at the cue card. Describe a time you moved into a new home or to a new school. You should say when you moved, why you moved, where you moved, and how you felt about it. So, if this was me, I would probably jot down some points. When, I would say 1996. Why? Because I passed the scholarship exam. Where you moved? To Devi. How you felt about it? Best choice. So now here I have made some notes. Remember, you have 1 minute to think about it and make some notes if you wish. You have to speak 1 to 2 minutes. So as I always tell you, speak closer upon 2 minutes. So, if I was to talk about this topic, when you moved, why you moved, where you moved, and how you felt about it. So I would start off by saying, well, I moved into a new school in 1996. Now, the reason why I moved to this school was actually in the Sri Lankan education system, we could do the grade 5 scholarship exam. This exam would allow you to move to a different school depending on the marks that you got. So, in 1995, actually, I did this scholarship exam and I got through with flying colors. So, I was able to get into a different school. So, I moved because my parents felt that going to a new school was a better option, and they wanted me to study in a different school because initially my primary education was in a private school and they wanted me to get into a state school. So that's why I actually moved and got into a different school. Now, where I moved to was one of the leading schools in Sri Lanka, and this was known as Devi Balika Vidyalaya. It is still known in the same name, right? And it's one of the best schools in Sri Lanka. How I felt about is where I was really unhappy at the start because the cultures were very different. I came in from a private school into a state school, which was totally worlds apart. But later on, as time went on, I realized that Devi Balika was a really good school, right? And I still think it's one of the best decisions that my parents made on behalf of me because I've got a great set of friends and they're well educated, and there's a lot of people around Sri Lanka working in different sectors. So even if you go into an office, like maybe a hospital, or maybe you go to the divisional secretariat, or wherever you go, you've got lots of friends working in those offices, and it's good. You feel good to be a part of that kind of school and community. So I feel that that was one of the best decisions made, and I really love my school. And I really love that my parents made that decision for me, encouraged me to move into this new school. Okay, so you can talk about it. I mean, it wasn't like a great answer, but it's not a bad answer. So it's definitely something you would get above 7, right? So you have to be able to talk. I mean, this is spontaneous. So this is like what I did was like something you would actually do at the exam. You can't pre-rehearse and do things, right? So I want you to have that natural feel. Now, if we have a look at this answer, you can start with a little introduction. Well, these days it is quite common to see people moving from one place to another. It should be one place to another, okay? For different reasons, right? I too had experienced the same thing when I was in 8th grade. So talking about a previous experience. Why? Because a time you moved, Again, this is in the past. Okay, so something that you do in the past, and that is what you should be using when you talk about that specific idea. So it's a past. I too had experienced the same thing when I was in 8th grade. Was experienced. Okay. Now, where you moved, you should be able to behind it, right? You need to set the context. So, when you moved, and then the student talks about where you moved. I actually did when, why, and where. You can do when, where, and why. You can have it in either order. I prefer if you could do it in this order, but there's nothing saying you must do it. Even if you do it in a different order, you cover these points, that's good to go. That's more than enough, right? So, where you moved, okay? However, my family decided to move to the city for my higher studies and a better future. So I think this also answers the question why you moved. Okay, so this question why is also answered in this one. So why? Because for higher studies and better future. So this bit answers the question why. Now, where they moved, more explanation about it, right? It was not easy for all of us to leave our ancestors' house, to live separately in a city where nobody knew us. We were finding it hard to adapt, not adopt. Adopt is when you adopt a kid. Adapt is change. So remember these two words. They are different in meaning. Some children say to adopt. Okay? Adopt is to get something new, like you adopt a child. Okay? Adapt is to change, be flexible. Okay? To the new place. Luckily, our neighbor Mr. Singh was a really friendly and kind-hearted person. He helped us in every possible way to make us feel at ease. Ease means to feel comfortable. Surprisingly, his son Karan was my age, or Karan, you can use whatever, but because he's a boy, son Karan, okay? And I got admission in the same school where he was studying. And just because of Karan, I could easily adjust at school and made many friends. In fact, on weekends, Mr. Singh, along with his family, used to take us for city tours. So a nice answer where you moved, okay? But I want you to think about it. Does it really answer the question where? No, specifically. Does it say which part? Where exactly? Or does it talk more about the things around it? You're right. It talks things more around it. You could explain this bit, but I want you to answer the question where. Okay? So when they ask you where, okay, talk about a specific location. So you can say, well, we moved to Delhi, or we moved to Mannar, we moved to Trinco. And then you can explain, the things around it and then how your neighbors helped you to settle in and things like that. But where needs to be more specific, and that's something that I don't see in this answer. I feel it's kind of beating around the bush but not really answering the question, okay? So think about it when you answer it. I think my answer that I gave before was more precise. So think about it in that manner. how you felt about it. In conclusion, although we initially missed our family and village house a lot, slowly and steadily we got used to the city life, especially visiting shopping malls, cafes, parks, playing in grounds, studying in libraries and others. Okay, don't worry too much about the punctuation because we're doing a speaking lesson. Okay, so here the student then talks about how they changed, how they felt the change, like they were missing the house in the village. So the comparison here they have made where is, look at this one here. We're just going to choose a different color. So live in our ancestors' house separately, nobody knew us, right? But here when he comes to the end, he or she talks about how they missed the village house, but how they slowly got used to the city life. Okay, so they moved from a village to a city, but it didn't really answer the question initially. Okay, so you can see how there are small mismatches in answers when we put it in writing. When you speak, actually, you wouldn't realize this, right? But when you put it into writing, or when you re-listen to someone talking, or when you're listening to someone carefully talking about a specific topic, then we would realize these mistakes. That is why I always tell you all, never just do a speaking practice test or a practice session. What do I always advise you? To record it. Why? Because when you record it, you can re-listen to it and see, I haven't answered the question. I haven't used a good range of vocab. I think my grammar isn't too good. I need to change it. That gives you some chance, right? Even though we are teachers, that happens to us. It's human nature. Okay, even the Cambridge examiner, you ask the examiner spot on to answer this question, same thing will happen. There could be slips, right? That's okay, but make sure you don't make big errors, okay? Or grammatical errors which are quite prominent. You don't go back and self-correct. You don't repeat things. You paraphrase the questions carefully. So those tips that I taught you at the start come into practice when you're actually doing the practice questions. All right? Okay. So here is another model answer for the same question. Now, 5 years ago, my grandparents moved with us from the village. Not a very good precise answer, but we could have a look at it. I just want you to see how answers are different, right? That's the whole point in doing these, putting it into writing and comparing it. Their health was deteriorating. Deteriorating means going down because of old age, and they were feeling lonely in the village. My father found it very difficult to take care of them and focus on his work at the same time. So he requested grandpa and grandma, that is, grandfather and grandmother, to come and live with us. At first, they were reluctant. Reluctant means they didn't, agree with it. They were saying, no, right? However, after some cajoling by my sister and me, they finally agreed. So I think it would be, however, after some cajoling by my sister and myself, okay? But what do you mean by cajoling? Persuade, okay? So what do? Oh, please come, please come, please come. It's good, it's good, it's good. So you keep on telling that, and then obviously they think, okay, why don't we just go, right? So why you moved, okay? Now, we had been so focused on convincing them to shift in with us that we had forgotten one thing. We had a small 2-bedroom house at that time, and it was insufficient for the 6 of us to live in the house. We adjusted for a while, but ultimately my dad decided to rent a 4-bedroom house about 5 kilometers from our old house. Our last house was rental as well, and despite the difference in size, there wasn't much difference in the rent between the two houses. Maybe it was because the house we shifted to was quite old. I had mixed feelings about the whole experience. So what really happened was, going back to our scenario, okay, let's have a look at the card. When you moved really didn't focus on when, right? But really didn't focus on when, but it was 5 years ago. Didn't tell the year or anything, but specifically 5 years ago, right? So what happened? The grandparents were not well. The scenario was the grandparents moved in with them, but they were in a 2-bed house, so that wasn't really enough. So later on, they had to move houses or shift to a new house, which was a 4-bedroom house. And since the previous one was also on rental, despite that, they didn't really feel much of a difference because it was only in size. And also because it was a little old, the house that they shifted into, he or she had mixed feelings. Mixed means maybe happy, a bit sad, quite unsettled about the whole thing. So had mixed feelings about the whole experience. All right. On the other hand, I was very happy that I would be getting my own room. It's a good thing. On the other hand, the house we shifted to wasn't as comfortable as the old one. There was no air conditioning in my room, so it got very hot during the day and I was barely able to stay in the room during the day. Barely means you were hardly able to stay. Why? Because it was very warm. But at night, as the temperature came down, I was able to sleep in the room. Moreover, I missed my old neighbors and friends. There were many children of my age in my previous neighborhood. In the new community, there was hardly anyone my age. It got very boring. So, about the experience now, let's go back. When you moved, it was about 5 years ago. Why you moved was explained really well because the grandparents moved in and all of that difficulty. Where you moved to a house which was 5 kilometers away from the original house, and a bit of the house description was also there. How you felt about was clearly outlined, mixed feelings, happy and then sad about certain things. So mixed means it was kind of happy and a bit of sad things. So it was talking about both sides. Now I felt model answer 2 was a bit better than model answer 1 because it was addressing all the parts which were in the bullet points. Okay. Right. So now coming into the conclusion, right? Actually, I'm very happy that my parents made that sacrifice for taking better care of my grandparents. So even though he or she had this whole regret about, So coming back to our question, what was it? When you moved, we spoke about it 5 years ago. And then why you moved? It was nicely explained because the grandparents had to come in and, the parents had to look after the grandparents. Where you moved? Yes, to a new house which was 5 kilometers away from their old house. And then about the experience. So that was what we were looking at, okay? So he or she had mixed feelings, happy that they came into a new house and, getting a new room, but a bit sad because it was very warm and, you didn't have much friends, missed the neighborhood, right? So there's a little more to it, My parents were afraid of sending me too far to my old neighborhood to play, but on a positive note, this meant I spent more time with my grandparents, which improved my bond with them. So that was a nice thing, okay? Positive note, right? I still reminisce about that old house sometimes, but I don't regret moving to the new house. So finally coming into the conclusion, actually, I'm very happy that my parents made that sacrifice for taking better care of my grandparents, okay? So even though he or she had mixed feelings about moving, because, on one side you got a new room and he or she was able to have, some freedom. On the other hand, it was warm and missed the neighborhood. But again, he or she talks about the positive, where the student had more time to talk with the grandparents and bond with the grandparents. So he or she still remembers those great moments shared. Okay. So finally, he or she says that they're happy that the parents actually took that good decision to take care of the grandparents. Okay. So I still feel that the second model answer is much better because it's more detailed and it answers all the bullet points which was actually there in the cue card. Okay. Now that's what I want you to do as well, and that's why I told you when you get time to prepare, please make sure you touch on all the bullet points and you run through it while you're speaking. So that's the way to make sure that you answer all the points and always explain it in a explanative manner without just saying duck, 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 Oh yeah, I went 5 years ago, it was here and this is what happened, this is what happened. We don't want 4 sentences, okay? We want you to be able to show the examiner that you can speak, you can explain using vocabulary and different sentence structures. So that's what you should be focusing on. Now moving on into part 3 questions, okay? Here are some of the examples that could come up for part 3 questions. Now, why do people move to a new home? This could be for different reasons. Maybe people sometimes want to change, right? And sometimes people move for different job opportunities from one place to another. Like say for an example, in Sri Lanka, when they're doctors, they need to move from one hospital to another hospital and they might have to move along with their family. So moving from one house to another house becomes quite vital for them, okay? And sometimes you move into a new house, like, you've been staying on rent for so long, but then you decide to build a new house and then you would have to move into your new built house. So that's another reason. Now, here are some of the reasons given to you. There are many reasons why people move to a new home. But most commonly, okay, nice phrase, people move for job education. In other words, people move when they get a job or join an educational institute which is too far for them to commute daily. Commute means travel daily. Another big reason is marriage or because of children. This is because either they want independence and privacy or because their earlier house might be too small to accommodate the growing family, okay? Could be reasons. But there are more reasons to add. I mean, you don't have to talk about 10, 15 reasons. Maybe 2 to 3 reasons is more than sufficient. And like I gave an example, you could pick up on an example, no problem, okay? But remember, don't bring out racist examples, okay? So make sure that your examples are neutral and they have no adverse effect, okay? And it's also because your facilities that you had before would probably change. I mean, in your old home, you would feel that you had all the shopping complexes, the supermarkets, the pharmacy, and the neighborhood was comfortable. But when you move to a new place, you don't have your neighbors. Like for me, I personally feel that because before I had a bunch of great neighbors. We were always going out, we would have parties, we would have get-togethers, movie nights, and now in my new house, we hardly have that. Okay, so I miss them always, but because I stay close by, we still meet up, so that's the good thing. But lots of people face those kind of different problems when they move to a new place, right? So, I mean, how do people solve these problems? I don't think this bit really answers our question. Now, when the examiner asks you a question, you don't ask the examiner a question back, okay? What you need to do is you need to first answer the question, and then maybe you could say, oh, what are different ways that we could solve these problems? But let's look at the answer. I think it depends upon the place they are moving to. For example, if they are moving to a new place with a different culture, they might face a culture shock. Now, this depends if you're going in from one culture to another culture. I don't think the student has really given a good answer. It depends. I mean, if you're moving into a new country, now example, if I moved from Sri Lanka to the UK for the first time, that would be a culture shock. But moving from Nugegoda to probably Batticaloa or somewhere isn't like a really big culture shock. I mean, you're living in the same country. Maybe certain practices are different, and not having that comfortable neighborhood might be difficult, but I wouldn't say it's like a big cultural shock, okay? So be careful when you use these words. Another problem is getting to know neighbors and making new friends. Yes, definitely could be one, okay? People solve these problems by having a housewarming party to invite new neighbors and get to know them, yes. But remember, your question isn't talking about how to solve these problems, okay? Your question should first talk about the problems. And I feel here that answer isn't that great. So, like I gave you some answers, think about some of the problems that people would actually face. So, when an examiner asks you a question, please make sure you first answer it. And then maybe you can bring out your opinions and views and ways how to minimize it. But first, answer the question. All right? Next one. What are the advantages and disadvantages of living in the same place? Well, talking about the positives first, I think it's really easy because you're used to the neighborhood, you feel comfortable, and therefore it's less stressful. But the disadvantages are sometimes when you're in that same place over and over again, it just doesn't make you feel good because there's nothing new about it, right? So I feel that it has positives as well as a few negatives like that. And it's kind of the same routine. It's very monotonous. You don't have something spicy into your life because same neighbors, same house, nothing to change. So sometimes it's good to have a change on and off, right? So here it says, it is comfortable to live in the same place for a long time. So you feel good, right? As people are familiar with everything, they don't need to spend time setting up for things again and again. So those are positives. On the other hand, it gets boring and monotonous to live in the same place. I feel so too, right? But unfortunately, once you build your own house in Sri Lanka, we'll probably live there for the rest of our life, okay? Because that's like a whole lifetime investment. Is it good to move to a new place frequently? I think it's good to move to a new place, but not frequently, because once you keep on doing that, that is quite stressful because there's a lot of setting up cost. You need to move your things and then you need to set up. If you've got kids, schooling needs to change because it might be far away. The environment keeps on changing and sometimes your kids can be unsettled, including yourself, because you need to keep on changing and setting up, changing and setting up. So I don't think that's really advisable. So here is a similar answer. I don't think it is good to move to a new place too frequently. Firstly, it might be challenging to do so financially, obviously. Moving involves a lot of expenses. Secondly, it might be difficult to make new friends and people might miss their old place. Finally, from a child's perspective or from children's point of view, it can be disastrous as it would affect their educational continuity because they need to go from one school to another, and that isn't great because the teachers are different, sometimes even the syllabus is different, ways of teaching, the methodology changes from institute to institute, right? So that could be quite stressful for kids and might even traumatize them, and you might completely lose them after some time. All right. And I think with that, we have come to the end of this lesson. So this lesson was fairly a good one, which was not a very prominent, card, but I like this one because this gives you the ability to think out of the box. Like, describe a time when you moved to a new home or school. Now, some children ask me, Miss, I've never moved to a new house or a new school. What do I do then? Well, tough luck, you've got to lie then. Think about your aunt's house and think that you moved there and talk about it. Don't tell the examiner, oh, I'm really sorry, I've never moved to a new house and there's nothing for me to tell. You have to talk. So like I told you, you don't lie, right? But if there's no option, then you have to make up a story, but don't make it completely, like a fantasy. I mean, you've seen someone else's house, talk about that house, how you moved there. Okay, so that's not bad, that's not wrong, but I don't advise you to keep on lying over and over. That's it, okay? So with that, we've come to the end of this speaking lesson, which focused mainly on speaking part 2 and part 3 around the cue card topic, describe a time when you moved to a new home or a school.